Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you looked at the thumbnail, you saw a huge stack of books. These books are most of the books that I read this week, which are all nonfiction books, at least that we'll talk about in this video. I did read two fictional books this week, but this video is dedicated to the nonfiction books. Now, these were all these were all print arcs that I received from Grand Central Publishing, Celadon Books, and St. Martin's. Yes, this is also Grand Central. So those are the three publishers I want to thank for these books. All the books except for the first one I gave 5 stars to. So we'll talk about the one that got 4 stars, and then I'm just going to briefly touch on these because if you are following my videos, then you will see more extensive reviews for each and every single book that we're talking about here. This one here was 30 Life Crisis, and this was navigating my 30s one drunk baby shower at a time. And so this was a kind of like a memoir, or no, actually it's a collection of essays, and it was really funny. I mean, I'm only going to go 4 stars, nothing wrong with it, but what this was is she just recounted different times in her life as she started acting. She explored her relationships, like the Shane Dawson, he did the forward in this book. He's her ex. And some of the things it talks about is parenting your parents, discovering that your boyfriend likes boys, a sudden sloth-like metabolism, gender reveal parties, and so forth and so on. So that's what 30 Life Crisis was. Very light book, very enjoyable. Then we're going to go on, and these are in no particular order, just how they happen to be piled over on this shelf here. This one is Love People Use Things, and this is by the minimal, and it says because the opposite never works. It's by the minimalist Joshua Fields Millburn and Ryan Nicodemus. Now, I am very pleased that one of my viewers loved this book so much she bought it for herself and for her friend, and they talked about it on one of the videos I was watching yesterday, one of the live streams. So I'm so glad that something that I found to be very beneficial and edifying influenced somebody else enough for them to want to read it. In this book, even though they are the minimalists, this book was more focused on loving people and working through relationship issues. I think this discussed 7 relationships. Yes, 7. It discussed stuff, truth, self, values, money, creativity, and people. So it explored all of these relationships and how we can learn to love people and not things, and even talked about how we can minimize certain aspects of our lives. The next book I read was The Black Agenda, and this is by Anna Gifty, Opoku, Aggeman. And this book was Bold Solutions for a Broken System. And the purpose for this book is basically it was a bold and urgent move towards social justice through a profound collection of essays, and what it featured was economics, education, health, climate, and technology. Now, there are always books about race problems. There are books right now about the pandemic. There's always books about war, and there's always books about injustice. But a lot, if not most of those books are by white authors. This is the first of its kind because it's all of the experts in this book are Black historians, professors, educators, and experts in many, many fields. This book was really, really good, very, very relevant, and at the end of the book, it had quite a bit of recommended reading, 2 pages worth of recommended reading. So that was The Black Agenda, which just went behind my desk. Then I read Finding Freedom. I just read this one yesterday. This is by Erin, and this was a cook's story remaking a life from scratch. Now, she grew up in her father's diner. She worked with him, I think, till she was about 15 or 16 years old. And then a couple years later, she went off to college. In her sophomore or junior year, she became pregnant, so she dropped out of school and went back to live with her parents. While she was growing up, her father was very, very hard on her. They did not have a good relationship. And now she is pregnant and about to bring a child into this world. Fast forward a year or so later, and she meets someone and falls in love and gets married, and she starts her own restaurant. The pressure from what ended up being a bad marriage and the pressure of running a restaurant, especially because she did not have any real formal education, even as a chef, led her to severe depression and anxiety and to a doctor who prescribed her pill after pill after pill. So she doubled, tripled, quadrupled the pills to the point where she became an addict and needed to go into rehab. But then she started over and she created something called The Lost Kitchen. And The Lost Kitchen is a show that has 2 seasons on the Magnolia Network. And I got that through Amazon Prime or Discovery Plus, one of them, and I watched 2 episodes today. So when I did the review on this book, I hadn't watched any of the episodes, but I did watch 2 episodes. I love this woman, and she's a beacon of, she's just somebody that you can look at that dug her way out of the trenches, and now she's wildly successful and happy and remarried. The next book, which is actually I think the second book I read this week, is The Book of Moods, and this is by Lauren Martin. And this is, what is it? How I Turned My Worst Emotions into My Life. This one I might do 4 stars, 4 or 5 stars. Now this book basically was how she used certain parts of her life. Like for example, with the book that fell behind the desk, and it talked about money, people, education, and so forth. This one touches on topics too. And these topics were the past and future, beauty, work, friends, family, the body, and unforeseen circumstances. And what she did is she discussed the mood described, what the mood is telling you, other chapters about the mood, and the mood transformed. So I thought this book was really, really good because I have been going through a lot with myself. Again, it's my truth. I have been going through a lot, and my life took a big shift at the end of January, and it almost took me down. And so reading books that are inspiring has really gone a long way to helping me in my phase of grief and recovery from what I experienced. Again, I reiterate, it's my truth. It's my feelings and my reaction and my triggers. This book, I just finished this 20 minutes ago. This is Wildlife, and this is Dispatches from a Childhood of Baboons and Button-Downs by Keena Roberts. Keena Roberts had 2 parents who were primatologists and professors, and she grew up in Kenya till she was about 6. They go back home to Pennsylvania because her parents were professors, as I mentioned. And then they got a grant, and the grant took them to Botswana, where they worked at what they call a baboon camp, and they studied the baboons in order to understand their relation, certain things relating to humans, and the grant lasted for years. So Keena and her sister Lucy would go back and forth between Botswana and Pennsylvania while her parents would work. So they would work and do their research, and they would go home and they would compile their research, and they would teach, and they would go back and forth. But every time that they came back to the U.S., Keena experienced a lot of problems in school from mean girls, bullies, and she had, her identity was at risk because she, living in Botswana, had danger, like lions and hyenas and elephants and snakes. But the predators that she had in the United States were girls of her own age who were bullies. So this was a really good memoir to see how she rose above that. And now, like when she finished high school, she went to Harvard, and now she works in the public health field and development economics. So she's a a woman that I highly respect. Now, this book that I want to talk about, I will be incorporating the book cover on the screen for this one, because this was not a print arc, this was an audiobook arc, and this is called Healthy Heart, Healthy Brain, and this was by I didn't get their names in front of me. Bale and Doneen. I want to give you their first names. I don't want to just. I know that it was two co-authors, and the third one is Lisa Collier Cool, but I just don't remember Dr. Doneen's first name and Dr. Bale's first name. And I have it right here. I'm just bringing it up. So Bradley Bale and Amy Doneen. I just wanted to give you their names because I think they deserve the respect of having their names being correct. This book basically, like I said, this was an audiobook arc, and this book basically was a breakthrough to preventing heart attacks and strokes. They have a method, it's called the Bale Doneen method, and they are employing this method to help to prevent heart attacks and strokes. And if you watch the full review on this video, you'll see what their method is and how they're using it and how it's helping people. And another thing I mentioned in that review is I found two Facebook groups, the Bale Doneen method and the Heart Attack Stroke Prevention Center. And I think I linked both of those Facebook groups in that other review. So I just wanted to add this in to the print nonfiction arcs, since this is a nonfiction book that I read this week. Okay, I had to shut it off and turn it back on. The next book I want to talk about, this was the first book I read in my journey to get all of these nonfiction arcs read. And by the way, all of these books are out. Every single one of them. I do have a few others that I'll get to, but these are the ones that I wanted to get read this week. This is The Book of Hope, Jane Goodall, by Jane Goodall and Douglas Abrams, and it's a survival guide for trying times. Now, this was a series of interviews that Doug Abrams did with Jane. Like he would go to wherever she was at, and he was interviewing her, and he asked her good, deep questions. But due to the pandemic, their last interview was over Zoom. And Jane, oh my goodness. Yes, I wanted to show you the table of contents. Okay. It is What is Hope? Jane's 4 reasons for hope. The resilience of nature, the power of young people, the indomitable human spirit, and becoming a messenger of hope. So I loved reading about Jane Goodall. Most of us who follow any type of nature shows from decades ago will have seen her work with chimpanzees. So there you have it. Then the last book I read in this hope of, I was just looking around, make sure I didn't miss anything, was Fighting for Space. This is 2 pilots in their historic battle for female space flight. The first pilot, Jesse Cochran, in the 1950s was fighting to become a pilot, especially as World War II started raging in the 1940s. She wanted to fly in the war, but she wasn't able to really do that because she was not in the military. She was not an officer, but she did form the Women's Auxiliary Service Pilots. And then the space war started. I mean, the space flight started to grow, and she decided that she wanted to be the first woman, or at least the first American woman in space. And it was her fight that we read about during maybe, I won't say 2/3 of the book, but more than half of the book. And then, because this is what is called a dual biography. So our other character, our other woman in this book, her name is Jerry Cobb, and she also wanted to be the first woman in space. Now, they both were record-setting pilots, like breaking the sound barrier and so forth. And so they were trying to get into the astronaut program, but at the time the astronaut program was being formed, women were not being allowed in it. So then they tried to formulate a women's astronaut program, including all the rigorous testing that you would have to go through in order to be considered to go up in space. Then the other aspect of this was, while the United States was developing its astronaut program, Russia was developing their astronaut program. So then it became a race for who would be the first woman on space, in space. And then if there was a first woman on space, be it American or Russian, who would be the first American woman in space? So that's what this book is, The Fighting for Space. So that's all I'm going to do in this video. I just wanted to summarize those. I did have one that was a DNF. I'm not going to lie. I was going to read this one. I read about 3 chapters, and I just decided that it wasn't a good fit for me. She Will Rise by Katie Hill. It's, she was a former She was a former congressional representative, and she lost her job, and there was a lot of reasons why and a lot of things that she was experiencing, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. So this is the only nonfiction book I did not get through this week that I had intended. So that's it. I will edit this video and get it up, and I want to thank you for watching. And I want to say, if you stay to the end of the video, each and every book that I read has its own individual review on this channel. So if you want to learn more in depth about any of these books, feel free to watch any of those videos. And I hope that you'll let me know in the comments if any of these books appeal to you and why these books appeal to you. So that's it for now. Bye-bye.